Transylvanian Sunrise. By Radu Cinamar with Peter Moon. Chapter 1, Under the Hawk's Eye. I will not make the story in this book any longer nor more dramatic than it really is. I will not adorn it with stylish literary embellishments, and because of that I do not expect acknowledgement of any hypothetical artistic value of the text. Instead, I will render as simply and concisely as possible events of an overwhelming significance to Romania and its people, against the background of numerous signs and plenty of evidence already pointing to a hidden canker now gnawing at the very heart and soul of the Romanian people with growing depth and speed. In fact, a great many high officials in the administrative, economic, religious and cultural structures of the country uphold this view. I for one could see for myself part of what, at present, is considered to be the biggest state secret in Romania and, given the nature of relations and meetings with high representatives of the main state power in the world, perhaps the most terrible secret on this planet. Its implications are huge, but intuition tells me that knowledge of the facts to be conveyed in this book will in time lead to a remarkable leap in the quality of human existence that will eventually bring down the thick wall of dissimulation, concealment, and lying which has been put up by those in power and by the occult interests of some organizations and persons in and outside the country. That is why my telling of this story may be at times almost blunt and unpolished like a roughly hewn diamond, or even as regimented as life in the barracks. But I find this to be the most appropriate choice of style for making known to the reader certain unique and even secret aspects of the world of politics, of the former Securitate and of today's Romanian Intelligence Service, RIS. My aim is thus to unfold in chronological order a complex string of events, facts, realities and correlations that, in my view and that of other competent people, are of great importance to the future of the country. The story is in fact a biography, updated to the year 2003, of a character who is real but whom many will think to be the hero of a legend or a science fiction adventure book. I shall take the liberty of alerting the reader from the very beginning to the danger of falling into the cheap trap of doubt and distrust. The facts and truths I shall convey should first be pondered over, and only then should conclusions be drawn as the reader may deem appropriate. I had the extraordinary opportunity of actually meeting the hero of the story, and I must confess in all honesty that I would not have made the decision of writing this book if he himself had not spurred me to it on many occasions. The long talks he and I had in some secret locations convinced me of the existence of unsuspected realities which I could then check for myself in various situations. But what convinced me the most in making the decision to tell this story was the shocking discovery of August 2003 in the Bucegi Mountains, to which I myself had partial access owing to an extraordinary combination of circumstances that the hero of this book had facilitated for me. In so doing, he may have wanted to shatter even the faintest trace of reticence I may still have had. But now I know. I witnessed it. I touched it. I can now say I have a bird's-eye view, and an accurate one for that matter, of true history since the dawn of time, of Romania and even of this entire planet. It will be quite difficult for me to render the accurate picture of the awe, bewilderment and even panic on the face of the few people who had access to the place. What I can say now is that was only the beginning of the discovery, since I did not have access to all of its elements, nor was I allowed to really see everything up there. Nevertheless, the person who steered all the investigations and offered me the unhoped-for chance of actually seeing the site of that momentous discovery also told me about that mysterious part of the place to which my access had been denied for reasons of maximum security. But one should not rush or anticipate. I shall describe everything at the right time exactly as it happened. However, I have no reservations about saying that was undoubtedly a landmark moment in reshaping both my views of the world and the career I was pursuing. I am asking the reader to bear with me and allow me first to follow the path that led to the extraordinary events in the Bucegi Mountains. In essence, this path is the very profoundly mysterious and troubling existence of the hero of the book, by whose side the complicated texture of destiny brought and kept me in a strange manner, to say the least. For reasons that are easy to understand, an alias, Cesar Brad, will be used as far as he is concerned. I have known Cesar Brad for almost 5 years. As we met and talked during these times, I became fully aware of his strength and extraordinary character. His entirely special position in the complicated machinery of state power makes him all the more credible in the fractured and yet very concise and coherent stories he told me during the few meetings we had, despite the fact that, for various reasons, our meetings sometimes took place in a hurry. It remains a mystery why, of all people, he chose me to tell the story. To a large extent, that may have been because of the seriousness and keen interest with which I have always listened to his account of the events. There are things that the mind of ordinary people may find difficult to digest. But the times we are living in are very special, so that what once seemed to be a dream or an act of rampant imagination now proves to be perfectly possible. At the end of our last meeting, Cesar made it clear in a calm and detached manner that the decision to write and publish the information he had given me was entirely mine. My whole being was struggling under the weight of that responsibility, and I confess it took me almost 1 year from that moment until I eventually succeeded in clarifying and putting events in the order in which they had been presented to me, and particularly in depicting them as clearly as possible. I wanted to render the chain of events and Cesar Brad's explanations with the highest possible fidelity, using almost the same words he himself had used in telling the story. I was encouraged to publish this book in a simple and natural manner. I then had the clear impression that even if, from fear or for other reasons, I had not done what I had been asked to do and had not written the book, Cesar would have considered the decision with perfect detached meant and would undoubtedly have found another way of fulfilling his intention. A birth unlike others. After a long night gave way to dawn, a young woman of simple but pleasant means was brought to the operating room as her contractions had started. She was not screaming but was rather scared. Fairly tired and somewhat bored by the routine of their job, the 2 nurses on duty were not really mindful of the woman. In the 70s, we were in the full swing of communist, multilateral development, when everything was, with the people, and for the people, and so demagogically equal and fair that one could no longer really tell the difference between a chair and a human. When called in at last, after several hours of labor that seemed like never-ending centuries to the mind of the would-be mother, Dr. Nenyu took a tired look at his patient's medical record: reason for admission, breaking of the amniotic liquid sac, general condition, good, blood pressure, normal, uterine contractions, rare, dilation, small. Everything seemed to follow the natural course of a normal childbirth. Upon realizing that he was spending more time looking at the record than at his patient, the doctor approached the table shaking his head at the thought that fatigue was playing tricks on him and thus making him inattentive. Not even a slight suspicion did he have that any trace of sleepiness and apathy would soon be shattered. He took a quick look and immediately clarified the stage of the birth process: it was imminent. Dilations were growing in size as was normal, and deep down Dr. Nenyu was glad he would not have to use the scalpel. The last and most painful of contractions brought to the world first the head of the child and then his tender and submissive body. The doctor carefully got hold of the child's hands, helping him out. The first problem was the length of the umbilical cord. Nenyu had seen a lot them in his life, yet, for a few seconds, he stood in awe at the sight of the cord, the length of which, almost 1.5 meters, was way in excess of usual standards. Time was precious and the birth process had to be completed successfully. When all loosened its grip on him, he took the scissors from the nurse's hands and cut the cord, or he attempted to cut it as he had done hundreds of times before in his career, but the blades of the scissors were sliding as if against metal. The doctor was staring in disbelief while the nurses stood motionless. In the few seconds that followed, he changed 2 pairs of scissors, but to no avail. The cord would not give in. It was highly elastic, like a piece of the most durable rubber. Dr. Nenyu had long years of medical experience and he had grown to be a self-possessed man. With precise movements, he grabbed a scalpel and pressed it repeatedly and forcefully against the cord. Eventually, the cord gave in and the first cry of life could be heard. The child was a plump boy with unusually clear and relaxed facial traits and a very strange umbilical cord. It happened at the dawn of a day in the spring of 1970. Events then rushed in. Amalia, "Go call the colonel immediately and tell him to come to the hospital as soon as possible," ordered the doctor. He then turned to the other nurse and said, "You get this cord for preservation. I'll see to the woman. Bring me her record." Colonel Datku arrived at the hospital after approximately 20 minutes. He talked to Dr. Nenyu for a short while and then had a long phone talk with one of his superiors in Bucharest. At noon, a black limo with a government plate pulled up in front of the maternity hospital in the town of E, and out came two stiff and quiet men. One of them was carrying a briefcase. Dr. Nenyu, Colonel Datku and the two men talked for almost half an hour in one of the hospital offices. Nenyu filled in a form that the Securitate men gave him and was then asked to wait outside for a while. After several minutes, the men left and the colonel approached the doctor, who was quite troubled. "This is above our heads, Nenyu. This was one of the first secret instructions I received upon promotion. In situations like these, I must follow a very strict and secret procedure. To you in particular, nothing special has happened today and you have not noticed anything strange. You do get it, don't you?" Thoughtfully, Colonel Datku lit a cigarette. After a few moments and without looking in the doctor's direction he said, "There's something else. The boy has no personal medical record. He has never had one. You will destroy it immediately. Nothing about this birth is to be left to the archives. The rest, believe me, is too complicated to be of interest to us." With a friendly tap on the doctor's shoulder, Colonel Datku left the hospital. Behind him, Dr. Nenyu stood staring dumbfounded into the void while in the ward an innocent mother was lovingly holding her newborn child close to her breast. A mind of his own. Little Cesar was not aware of the special attention he was surrounded with, and he obviously knew nothing about the manner in which the Securitate was keeping an eye on him. At his early age, he could not possibly understand the reason for his being an important matter of interest. The same could be said about his parents, who suspected nothing. It had been a normal birth, with the mother having been told nothing about what had happened at the maternity hospital, and the months that followed did not bring anything unusual in the simple and modest homestead of the Brads. As time passed, however, little oddities came up in the behavior of the baby, such as the fact that he would not cry at all or would hold his fingers in strange positions, touching or bending them in ways that became identically emerging patterns at regular intervals. His parents watched him with astonishment but calmly. Common sense made them understand that nothing could be wrong with the somewhat strange preoccupations of their child. On the contrary, the time came when it was a real pleasure for them to watch the play of his little fingers, a play that was otherwise very elegant and second nature to him. Sometimes the child would stand still for minutes in a row while maintaining the same structure of his fingers that would either take the shape of a circle or get crossed and then successively touched with the thumb in well-determined positions. Cesar's parents were very happy their little boy did not cry and was not a problem at night. But above all, they were happy he had never fallen ill until then. Time, however, furtively sowed in their souls the seed of a hidden suffering which slightly troubled the peace of their daily life. Little Cesar would soon be 1 year old and he had not yet uttered a word. Still, the problem was not too serious. Although they had seen such cases before, they were already considering a visit to the doctor. When Cesar turned 1 year old, two gray-eyed tall men, both dressed up and with looks as cold as ice, knocked on the door. Behind their elegant manners and the intentionally affable tone in the conversation they had with Cesar's parents, one could easily detect intolerance to any possible resistance coupled with a tacit but obvious threat with reprisals should the parents disobey orders from above. They introduced themselves as members of a special department of the Securitate. Their gestures were casual and yet they strangely instilled a sense of fear in those listening to them. In those times, the Communist Securitate was already painfully renowned for its ways of action and intimidation, but in the case of the Brads, their method took on a somewhat more humane course. The visit was short and practically consisted of a monologue by the two men while Cesar's parents remained standing with embarrassed looks on their faces. The main point of the monologue was that the Brads had to follow precisely the instructions they were given. It had just been brought to the attention of the poor people that their son was under the eye of certain relevant structures for reasons relating to great state interests which they should not be aware of. Their mission was to inform immediately, directly, and without recourse to any third party. The two men insisted a lot on this requirement, of any strange, unusual or out of the ordinary development in their child's behavior. They were given a form to fill in with both having to sign a statement confirming agreement with terms and conditions. Also mentioned in the statement was the requirement that a monthly report be handed in to Colonel Datku. They were not allowed to ask any questions or know the reasons of that action. Still, at the end of the visit, they were offered a special allowance, in cash that was quite normal for those times, to be received on a monthly basis as a compensation of sorts for the strange situation that had practically been forced upon them. The two men left immediately after that. I should mention at this point some pieces of information that can shed light on the behavior of Cesar's parents. Nikolai Brad was over 30 and known particularly as a quiet, somewhat reserved, and industrious man. He worked as a clerk with the mayor's office. Obedient in most cases, he was nevertheless capable of compromise, betraying some crevices and repressions of his psyche. The intelligence service may already have had his psychological record and had rightly assessed his inner tendencies since, as it later turned out, the allowance in cash was mainly meant to quiet down some possible dissatisfaction and secure sincere cooperation on the part of Mr. Brad. Indeed, psychologists had correctly evaluated his emotional profile, as he proved to be sensitive to financial security, which he even placed above certain moral issues. That was Nikolai Brad's compromise, and winning him over for the cause of the Securitate had been quite easy. Mr. Brad and his wife, Smiranda, were poles apart. Cesar's young mother had a romantic and sensitive nature, and the material side of life did not weigh much with her. Ever since her childhood, drawing had been her passion, and she would spend long hours amusing herself or sinking deep in thought with her sketches depicting a wide range of themes that inspired her spontaneously. Unfortunately, she could not harness the energy it took to face life, and the conflicting situations made her suffer. The situation in her family had become rather tense, as she was in a way forced to spy on her own child. In her silent but helpless refusal, she would have liked to have her husband on her side, but he had quickly opted for the practical solution with no complications attached. In fact, "We are not being asked to do anything wrong," he would say to soothe her. "We don't even know what to expect. Time will take care of everything." This was his usual and philosophical closing remark. That was actually the beginning of a separation between them, with consequences that were not necessarily physical but mostly emotional. By the time he was 3 years and 2 months old, Cesar Brad had not uttered a single word. For a while, his parents thought he was dumb, but were then quick to realize that this could not be the case, as the child laughed, screamed at times, or even babbled. True, those occasions were quite rare, but enough to prove that his disorder, if any, was not pathological. They met Colonel Datku in the first month after the visit they had had from the Securitate, when, according to the commitment they had signed, they had to see him and hand in a report. To them, he seemed a kind, serious and even understanding man who left the impression he was acting only on an obligation. He was nevertheless conscientious about his mission, talking in detail with the parents about their child's behavior, and dutifully writ down everything he was told about the child. Every month, he himself would give Nikolai Brad the special allowance money. At the end of each visit, he would always say, "You will talk to no one about these things, but above all, you will see no doctor about the child. Should any problem arise, I'll be the first you'll call, and I'll take measures as appropriate."